Thank you all very much. Now I'm going to welcome Alex Zablocki to the stage to begin our next session. Alex Zablocki.
Good afternoon, everyone. Wasn't that a great performance? Yes. Well, I just want to begin by thanking the Design Trust for Public Space for inviting me today to introduce the panel, and also for bringing us all together to discuss how to center health equity in design and planning of our great city. I'm Alex Zablocki, and I have the honor of serving as the Executive Director of the Public Housing Community Fund. Now, that name of our organization may not be familiar to you. That's because about 2 weeks ago, we launched a new brand and name. We are formally known as the Fund for Public Housing, and we were founded in 2016. The fund supports the New York City Housing Authority, or NYCHA, and its residents by working in public-private partnership to invest in high-impact programming related to 4 key areas: leadership development, workforce training, financial empowerment, and community health initiatives. We collaborate daily with funders, program partners, some in this room today, public housing residents, and NYCHA to deliver transformative programs to improve quality of life and community health across NYCHA communities. And for those that are not familiar, NYCHA is the largest and oldest public housing authority in North America. Over 7% of New York City's rental units are owned by NYCHA, and NYCHA is home to over 500,000 New Yorkers that we know of. 1 in out of every 16 of us live in NYCHA. And NYCHA is also the largest landowner in the city, having 2,400 acres of land, largest outside of the city of New York, across 335 developments in all 5 boroughs. And as you know, open spaces are essential to our overall well-being, providing us with a place to exercise, relax, and connect with nature. Of course, we saw this during the COVID-19 pandemic. These spaces provide social cohesion and are vital to the health and well-being of a vibrant city. Unfortunately, many NYCHA residents lack access to quality outdoor spaces to enhance their quality of life and improve community health. Now, the fund is working with NYCHA and partners, many in this room, on innovative funding and implementation solutions, such as our Green Space Connections program, to address this problem while aiding in the preservation of public housing in a country and city currently facing a housing crisis. Studies have shown that spending time in green spaces can reduce stress, improve mood, and enhance cognitive function. Investments in and providing access to open spaces help promote physical activity and will reduce chronic disease risk. Back in 2021, not too long ago, a capstone team from Columbia University SEPA released a report titled A Roadmap for Equitable Open Space Planning for the New York City Housing Authority. The research studied the co-benefits of open spaces at NYCHA related to physical and mental health, public safety, and the environment. And the report noted that there was strong evidence linking access to quality public spaces as a notable factor in remedying deficient mental and physical health. The report indicated that 80% of NYCHA's older residents have more than one chronic condition affecting their longer-term health, and they found that NYCHA campuses are not designed in such a way to influence active habits that improve health. Evidenced by a report from 2015 that found that 31% of older NYCHA residents had not engaged in any physical activity in previous months when asked, and that is quite alarming. Improving the quality of NYCHA's open spaces can also help address environmental justice issues, as you all know. Investing in and enhancing green spaces can reduce air pollution, limit flooding, and improve the overall environment. NYCHA is home to 1,000 acres of urban forest. Many people don't know that. Largest outside of the city park system itself, and it's already playing a key role in areas of our city that lack green space, reducing temperatures on average by 3 degrees on a NYCHA campus that has dense vegetation versus neighboring communities that lack trees. And this tree cover must be maintained. NYCHA's open spaces can also create safe, accessible, and welcoming environments that encourage residents to spend time outdoors and with each other, building stronger community connections and promoting a sense of belonging and pride. In 2020, NYCHA took a bold step of planning the design of open spaces across 133 NYCHA developments, and in 2021 released the NYCHA Open Space Master Plan, bringing us one step closer to making this vision of a healthier, more connected NYCHA and city a reality. We have the roadmap, and now is the time to act, and that's what we are doing at the Fund with many of our partners here. As NYCHA focuses on tackling a $40 billion capital deficit, with funding prioritized for things like heating systems, apartment renovations, and other building systems, open space falls last in that spectrum. And we, the nonprofit sector and philanthropy, have the opportunity to work with government, planners, and residents to transform and bring about positive change to NYCHA's open spaces. We must also find ways to creatively activate and maintain these spaces with 21st century public-private partnership models to sustain investment and ensure areas remain usable for generations. Investing in NYCHA's open spaces is not just an investment in health and well-being of residents, it is an investment in the future of our city and the future of public housing. I hope that out of conversations like we will have today, and we've had earlier today, we can continue building a stronger, more equitable city by investing in public housing communities. Thank you. So without further ado, I would like you to join me in welcoming the following guests to the stage. Our panel discussion today is moderated by Tamara Greenfield. Woo! Tamara is Vice President of Public Space and Operations at the Downtown Brooklyn Partnership, where she oversees planning and care of the public realm. Next, joining us to the stage is John Douglas, Director of Land Use at the Brooklyn Borough President's Office. John is an urban planner whose work has been focusing on improving public health outcomes for New York City residents. Next, joining us is Jenna Miller. Jenna Miller is the Deputy Director of the New York City Public Design Commission, where she authored Designing New York, Streetscapes for Wellness, and oversees interagency public realm design and policy initiatives. Next, joining us to the stage is Julie Bero. Julie is the Chief Strategy Officer of the New York City Department of Transportation, where she leads the policy vision for the department. And last but not least, Kim Kessler, joining us on stage, is the Assistant Commissioner at the New York City Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, where she leads an interdisciplinary team focused on addressing chronic disease through policies, programs, communications, and research aimed at shifting environments, changing systems, and advancing health equity. Please welcome our panelists to the stage, and thank you again.
Thanks, Alex. So we have a pretty tough act to follow with the earlier panel. And I would say we sort of heard from our current citizens on their vision for the future. And so now we're going to hear from some of the folks who have the, hopefully, power to influence and start to shape that vision and bring it into reality. So I'm going to start with Kim because I think we all understand that there has been a seismic shift in the way that COVID has impacted our perception of how the public realm impacts how the public realm impacts health equity. So I'd love to hear a little bit from you about what you've seen and also what kinds of plans you're putting in place from the Department of Health and with other agencies.
Great, thank you so much. It's amazing to be here. It's been such a fantastic day already. So excited to join you. And yeah, I mean, as you said, I think COVID has just made it so even more obvious how important our public spaces are. And the other thing that it really underscored and was talked about earlier, just how it completely reinforced and deepened the inequities that we know exist in our city. And in light of that, it's something that's really, of course, informed all of the department's work, but our Board of Health also passed a resolution declaring racism as a public health crisis in 2021. And so that charges the agency with taking concrete actions to address racial inequities in the city. And part of what that resolution calls for is working with other city agencies and other partners to take into account how our history of racism is affecting health and what kinds of actions we need to take to address that. And so I share all of that context because it certainly shapes how we're understanding everything today, and it informs the longer term project that we've had underway to update the active design guidelines, which many of you may be familiar with, but were adopted or issued or shared in 2010, and at the time they really were this pioneering document that was a call to action to folks like you, to our architects, our designers, our planners, to see their role in health and to understand how the built environment is so shaped, is so connected to health. And at the time, really with a focus and a grounding in the connection to chronic disease and how the built environment can increase physical activity. And so thinking now, that landscape has changed, and there's more and more evidence about broader impacts of connections between health and the built environment, mental health, social cohesion, public safety, civic trust. And so we are now in the process of updating those guidelines, thinking about all of those pieces, and to have a sort of much more holistic set of strategies that outline, how we can together make the spaces that will improve health in all those ways using the strategies that we know matter. And at the core of that is really equity, and thinking about how equity needs to be at the forefront of all those strategies. And it's not just about what we do, but how we do it, and the community engagement process that's necessary for taking steps to change spaces around us. So that all has been deeply informed by COVID, and what we in many cases knew, but what we now can't unsee about how we have to act in our responsibility as government.
Great, thank you. Jenna, in your recent report, Streetscapes for Wellness, you identified that there's 6,300 miles of streets. How do you think that our streets reflect the values of the past? And how could the streetscape change if we actually put health equity at the center as a driving value? And where does PDC fit in that?
That's a great question, Tamara. So our streets in New York City, obviously, connect spaces throughout our neighborhoods. They are literally our front yard, or everything that gets us from point A to point B. I'd say that pretty much everyone in this room probably interacted with at least one street today. But really, our streets have been shaped by structural racism over, decades and generations. We've seen entire neighborhoods raised by highways. We have seen that actually the space of our roadbed expanded at some point in history around the time that the Ford Model T was on the roads. And that was really done as part of a public health effort in many ways. The automobile at that point in time was seen as a vast improvement to, the horse-drawn carriages and the filth that was in our roadbeds at that point in time. And so, this isn't the first time that we're thinking about our roadways in terms of public health. But COVID really gave us the opportunity to rethink really, what that balance is, between cars and drivers and pedestrians. And I think that, at the Design Commission, we're in a really unique position where we oversee design of pretty much everything that's proposed on city-owned property in non-historic districts. And so what that means is that we really do see what's happening across neighborhoods in terms of, really from an equity lens, and we're able to draw as well from what we saw over the past few years from our community members, and take that and inform some of the projects that are being proposed on city land.
Julie, sort of the same question, but also because obviously DOT is intricately linked to the streets, but also how have you seen, what has been the impact of the massive expansion and rethinking of open streets, and what's kind of the future vision for that?
Yeah, thank you. So, our agency is truly focused on reimagining our public spaces. I think what we learned from COVID in particular was not only that open streets became a creative solution to address the real mental health issues that people were facing after long isolation, and public health issues of really being, not having space to physically be together, but it really showed us that we could overcome governmental barriers and bureaucracy in a way that we never had before. We were able to use emergency declarations to immediately move to use our open spaces in ways that people had never dreamed of, with families being able to eat outside, to play. And we saw also a lot of the traditional conversations around the importance of car culture start to melt away. I think 34th Avenue, which many of you I'm sure are familiar with in Queens, is the prime example of that, where we saw many fights about losing parking spaces turning into, well, how can we service these 7 schools over this 1.3 miles and really turn it into a vibrant community-driven space. And so, it really struck me what Milo was saying on the earlier panel about the space to be free to be yourself. And so really like focusing on community organizations, community leaders to build these spaces. And we've seen the results make a lot of sense. We've seen a decrease on 34th Avenue by 42% of pedestrian-involved crashes. So for us, it's not just about community safety, it's also about personal safety, about the ways that we build community and can really bring together the connective tissues of our streets to rebuild our communal commitment to our city.
John, you're coming at it from a little different perspective because you're not coming from an agency. So in your role how does your role at the Brooklyn Borough President's office differ from that of the agency? And what is your office doing to help bring a more unified vision together for Brooklyn?
Yeah, thank you. So fortunately or unfortunately, we are an agency as well. So it's interesting arrangement. But, yeah, we do have a little bit of a different perspective. Brooklyn is, Kings County is the jurisdiction. It's Brooklyn Borough President's Office, if you don't know, is a somewhat parochial or like it's a office that was sort of created before the current arrangement of the charter. And so the mayor's office took over a lot of the responsibilities of the borough president's offices over time. The borough president still votes on ULURP items, has his own budget, and also does some agency work around the city map and our public streets. And so we kind of straddle both sort of big policy issues and then on the sort of where the borough meets the road literally with how our streets are mapped and built. That's a big picture. In terms of planning, we sort of occupy this unique role where the agencies are broken down in many ways, but one of them is at the borough level, and the borough president convenes the cabinet of all those borough agencies. So there's an opportunity there for all the agencies that do sort of more or less siloed work to have an opportunity to speak and coordinate on some of these priorities that overlap. The borough president last year started the comprehensive plan for Brooklyn. It's a data-driven process. We've been lucky enough to work with Regional Planning Association and New York Academy of Medicine to help us unpack some of the CDC data around public health. Something first time I've been really looked at as an urban planning professional. I think the profession's moved a little bit towards architecture, less from the public health side, sort of the history, like DSNY. There was a lot of planning around public health initially. And so we think there's an opportunity, as public health, we see those inequities in Brooklyn in particular, East New York, Brownsville, areas, NYCHA areas where you see life expectancy, there's quite a discrepancy by race and income in Brooklyn. And so we're looking at, the whole picture around access to medical facilities. A lot of folks who don't have insurance rely on our public safety net hospitals. Half of our employees, half the people that work in Brooklyn are in the education or healthcare industries. Our biggest employers at healthcare industries are hospitals, nursing homes, adult care facilities. There's a lot of opportunity for growth in those industries, but a lot of folks in those industries are relatively low paid. So looking at connecting where those folks live to job opportunities, to transit, all those things that are determinants of health have been really the forefront. And just last thing is that housing is so critical that we see housing first as the sort of the first barrier to start doing public service or social service work with folks that are unhoused. And so looking at opportunities to get more housing built is critical. Clearly, affordable housing is ideal. And so trying to bring the conversation around housing, how important it is to determinants of health. And so trying to center that conversation. And we have a public meeting on May 18th at Borough Hall. If anyone's in Brooklyn, come over and share your thoughts. We'll have some boards and we'll have a good time.
So we study the city a lot. There's a lot of data out there. I've been in rooms with a lot of people in this room where we've looked at all of the data and we've identified again and again the same neighborhoods that need investment. So how do we go past the planning and research and understanding into action? Like, what are some tangible, actionable things? You guys are gathering a lot of amazing data. How can your office take actionable steps, or what are some things that you're thinking that you can really put on the ground, and how would a individual in that community, in a community, actually experience that?
Yeah, I think gathering the data feels like an opportunity because, you know, we've been lucky. I'm lucky enough to work at a time when we have so much access to big data. I was sort of on the edge of that, and the Department of City Planning has done a lot of work with Office of Technology and Information, however you say it, to get a lot of open data with a lot of hard work with advocates from like Beta NYC and et cetera, like trying to get that information to the public. We have a lot of that in New York, but putting it all in one place and at the scale for the borough is I think, has been helpful for folks to understand, sort of have one place to look at all the issues that are facing Brooklyn, and different stakeholders have different opportunities to engage. If you're a nonprofit, how can my work do the most good in this borough? Well, we know that those challenges are most concentrated in this area. And so we can direct the money or direct our resources in the best way, the most efficient way possible. From that point, the borough president has his own budget, so he did allocate $45 million to our H&H hospital system to upgrade the maternal health clinics in those hospitals to sort of reduce the inequity around maternal health outcomes for women of color. And then on ULURP, we get an opportunity to leverage some of the dynamic real estate in New York. And so when looking at gaps in healthcare, looking for that we can sort of co-locate housing and public health clinics, which I know that DOHMH has been spearheading as well. And looking at incorporating active open space, incorporating bike lanes, all those sort of things that these agencies are doing, but that we can help as projects are elevated, that we can start thinking holistically or try to get some, improve it a little bit if we can.
I'll throw the question to others.
So we're legislated and also fully support a streets plan. And so that means that we are, in a really systematic way, putting down protected bike lanes and improving existing bike lanes, putting in new bike lanes, same for bus lanes, and just making our intersections a lot safer, whether that be through raised crosswalks or better signaling or building out better intersections themselves. And I think what's so important in government is that obviously we can influence our streetscape, but there's just an incredible amount of resources. This administration has funded hundreds of millions of dollars into this plan. And we really, I think, have to use the data to figure out where we're putting our money, and that's what we're doing. We have laid out in our streets plan priority investment areas where we're assessing race, income, density, and a history of underinvestment. I think that last part is extremely critical because so often the loudest voices in the room get the most investment. But we're really trying to lead from an equity lens. And so we're excited. We recently put in a significant street improvement project in Southeast Queens along Jamaica Avenue, a mixture of a permanent busway and also pedestrian improvements, street seats, safety improvements. So it's really creating those built environments in the places that have long been ignored that I think is so important in our work.
Do you want to?
I would just say, we are not a major infrastructure type of agency, but certainly I think, like in the words of our commissioners, talked about the importance of the Department of Health's role as the city health strategist. And so part of it is the ongoing sharing and describing of data and what the health impacts are across the city, but also what the evidence shows us about how we can undo these harms. So that's certainly part of our role. And then we do have projects that we work on at a smaller scale, but one of our long-term ongoing programs is active design in schools, and we work with schools to make investments in the built environment. And I want to again kind of emphasize the how in doing that. And so in all of those projects, certainly take into equity considerations in terms of selecting the schools, but also have a community engagement process so that the students are engaged and informing what are the needs, what do they want from their spaces, and then help inform the design of whatever intervention comes about in those schools. And we've worked with over 90 schools since 2015. So even at a small scale, I think you can see action and change in the community level.
I think that's a great example of the next question I wanted to bring to you guys, which is, how do we bring some of the tools from design around planning, experimentation, small-scale design projects, how do we bring it to more communities? How do we bring it to more diverse communities? Because I think we've all seen that there's incredible examples across the city, particularly in more resource neighborhoods. But how do we bring some of those same creative strategies, tools, and resources to neighborhoods that haven't had the same access? Jenna, do you want to say anything? Because I think there was a lot of good examples in your study.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so within Streetscapes for Wellness, we highlight about 30 case studies, ranging from really ephemeral projects that we saw arise during the pandemic through, capital investment projects. And really, like, these case studies are looking toward what can happen when there is flexibility and when we listen to our communities. And I know that many of the people in this audience actually contributed to the book in one way or another, so thank you all. We couldn't have done it without really the community members and the people in our design community who really took a stance and took the opportunity when the emergency declaration was in place to be able to work with community members, to work with the local organizations, to try and understand what were the needs within those spaces, and to elevate those voices, to connect people to resources, and to really try and facilitate some sort of change in response to emergencies, in response to lack of prior investment. And I think that learning from all of what we've seen when allotted flexibility is what we as government agencies can then take and learn from and really apply to the capital investment projects that we, that I'm reviewing with our commission and that your teams are leading moving forward. So.
Yeah, and I guess, did you want to?
Yeah, I think I want to just, I've, thinking about planning profession, I think it's been a little bit removed from, I didn't know about the planning profession until I went to graduate school. And I went to a conference recently that introduced me to the exploratory scenario planning, which is like a low-tech way to think about the future of your community in an uncertain period. And you basically prepare for 4 different eventualities and look at impacts and solutions from each of those eventualities, and those common threads and suggestions or next steps and actions that satisfy all those scenarios, you can move forward with that. And scenario planning is a very technical, usual work. This is like a very low tech. It's like a 2x2 matrix, and it's I think it's an excellent tool to work with communities when you don't have a lot of resources available to you. But it's a collaborative work environment for groups, and then it's an opportunity just to say that we don't know the future, we can't predict the future, but we can prepare for potential eventualities. And I think that's a little bit more of a humbling way to look at planning and a way to engage folks where they're at. So just wanted to throw that out there.
I've never heard of it. It's great. I think part of the experience I have now working in a business improvement district is that there's quite a heavy dependence on intermediaries in order to enact a lot of the city's visions. How can we think about that role of the intermediary also in a way that is promoting health equity? Are there ways that we could be engaging different kinds of intermediaries? Who else can we bring to the table? Because obviously not every neighborhood has a bid. Not every neighborhood has a civic association at that scale that can take on some of the risks that we're asking them to take on in order to further some of the really extraordinary opportunities that exist in the public realm, but require some kind of pretty heavy intervention by the nonprofit sector generally. So I'm going to put that to Julie because I think DOT has a lot of those programs which are excellent, and I'd love to see in more communities.
Yeah, Yeah, I mean, my perspective is that government has a responsibility to provide access, and if a community doesn't have the resources or capacity to do it, then it's our responsibility to facilitate. And I think that's something we've not always done a good job at, but we're trying a number of new things right now. And certainly BIDs and more established community organizations are critical to all of our work. For example, I know we were just talking backstage about the DOT art program, putting down mural art and mural asphalt on the streets. But I'm leading the BQE corridor vision, the Brooklyn Queens Expressway corridor vision work right now. Actually, some of our community partners are in the audience. Yeah. But we made the decision to pilot a program to actually fund community-based organizations throughout the Brooklyn corridor at $25,000 each to pretty much do unfettered work. And those are organizations that do both traditional community planning, like Fifth Avenue Committee, and also organizations that, for example, work on gender-based violence or providing social services and healthcare access. And so I really feel like we have a responsibility to broaden the scope of who we work with. My background is health and human services. I came through to transportation sort of a circuitous way. And I don't see us succeeding in working with community partners unless we're working across all disciplines. And in the case of these community grants that we're doing, our staff, and some of them are in the room, also are doing an incredible amount of work to support and support community organizational development as well.
And is there, from that, I mean, that's really fascinating. Is there examples of some of the things that have come up from groups like that who are not traditional planning entities that maybe are a surprise? Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, probably the biggest surprise to me, and you called out affordable housing as well, but we've really heard throughout our process around BQE planning that we can't just be thinking about transportation. And maybe it's obvious, but really people calling for thinking about affordable housing, saying, a couple people said, I really would like to see a homeless shelter in my community because I want my family to be able to stay near me. We've been thinking about deliveries to rest stations and workforce development kiosks and all different sorts of ways that we could actually support the existing communities and try not to allow our changes to the built environment cause gentrification. And so, I really welcome that conversation and hope we can do more and more of it. We're going to be piloting it on the Cross Bronx as well, and hopefully we can continue to do that as we move forward.
We heard also earlier, I thought it was really interesting how often the panel that had young people on it mentioned the importance of public space and activation of public space towards mental health issues. And I think it's such a tricky place to be engaged and to have really a clear understanding of what we can do. And Kim, do you have some thoughts or some of the things that have come up through the active design guidelines reboot about some of the ideas for what we can be doing in the public realm to particularly impact mental health and our mental wellness, which has been so impacted over the last few years?
Yeah, that panel was just really profound with so many of the reflections that were shared, and I think certainly, as I referenced a little bit, we are seeing more evidence showing that connection, and I think it's intuitive to all of us as we've talked about just being here today, but access to green spaces, for example, having connections to mental health. But the other thing that I want to emphasize is, again, like that process itself and the engagement process, which I think that panel also spoke about. And so when people, if we can have processes that can build trust and have enough, time to have that trust, have, clarity around roles, and that will affect people's sense of agency in the projects that are developed, and then their sense of connection and social cohesion. And so that is linked with mental health. So I think that's an important thing to think about. And I also realized I want to give a shout out to Josh Langham and Teddy Swenson, who are sitting here, who lead our active design program, and Teddy leads the schools program. Yes. Because because it also brings to mind one of the projects that was done this year our Active Design Schools program has traditionally focused on increasing opportunities for physical activity. But when schools went back in the 2021-2022 school year, one of the projects that Teddy worked on in partnership, and this is a very partnership-driven kind of program, worked with students who were really looking at having that sense of belonging and safety, recognizing everything that students had been through. And so ultimately, that was what was identified as a priority with the students, and ultimately they developed banners that talked about mental health, accessing mental health resources, being together, also physical activity, and had an entire kind of engagement process around that. So I think that connection goes to both, what kind of spaces are we in and how do they promote health, but also what are the processes and how does our government work in ways that can support health. Our government and others who are making spaces. I think it's not just government.
And like during the pandemic, I think one of the things that folks who, both in communities and also within government, felt was one of the silver linings was that we really saw agencies work outside of their silos a little more and push what they could do together and think about what each brought to the table. How can we keep that going? How can we keep the agencies from retreating back, or the different strategies and issues from being separated from each other? I mean, I think we just heard how important housing is in the middle of all of this other conversation around health equity and the public realm. What are the ways that we can really charge agencies to continue to do that work in tandem with communities? I'm going to throw it to you, since you guys are doing the cross-disciplinary planning.
So I guess looking at overlapping projects that satisfy overlapping goals. And so one of the examples we use is the IBX, the proposed IBX, because it satisfies a lot of the public health outcomes that we're looking for, which is encouraging folks to get out of vehicles if they can, and walk and take transit. It's connecting more folks to our transit network. It's providing opportunities for housing growth. It's connecting our industrial areas and moving more trucks off of the roadway onto rail and to barge. So there's sort of looking at how different projects satisfy multiple overlapping goals can help. One thing about budgeting, housing first is a money saver at the bottom line, instead of spending money on incarcerating folks or institutionalization. Housing first has been shown to reduce the amount of services really needed for that population. So just trying to show how overlapping objectives and goals can be achieved by maybe one same project, and look at how we budget and collaborate on those budgets to achieve those same projects.
Great example. Any others that people want to share? I think maybe we should open to questions. I'm going to ask one question more of all of you guys. It could be a quick one, quick answer, which is, what are the third rails? Like, what are the things that we really are going to have to lean into if we want to reshape our public realm to better serve health equity? You can just say a word if you want, or a phrase.
Kindness.
What did you say?
Kindness.
Yeah. I think Gabby called it out on the earlier panel, also really just thinking about how our public spaces and design can be used for good, really considering how all New Yorkers use our spaces, whether or not they're housed, whether or not they're dealing with mental health crises. And I think that's something that we as a city haven't grappled with enough. We spent a lot of time during COVID talking about people who were using drugs in public spaces, but really trying to make sure that our public spaces and our design are directing people towards services and supports that they need. And a lot of that is just, I think, about community resiliency.
I really think that listening actively and trusting the people who live in our city's many communities is key to being able to design for people. And I think that trying to understand better from an architecture and planning perspective, like what is it that community members need and what is it that they're telling us that they need, and where are the disconnects, and constantly sort of revisiting the conversation with community members and keeping them involved through the entire planning and design process.
I think that listening is really important because there are real tensions when, as was talked about throughout the day in terms of our spaces, we have so many needs and we have limited spaces. And so there needs to be, acknowledgement of things that haven't gone right to begin to have the right, the conversations that are open, that can open us to new possibility and recognize like there will be tensions and difficulties in that.
Well, that's a good segue into this. How should we best balance competing priorities, housing, open space, transit, et cetera, when it comes to health? Good question.
It's a great question.
Anyone?
I mean, so within Streetscapes for Wellness, for instance, we kind of came up with our own strategy for thinking about the case studies and evaluating them. And we really looked to 4 different sort of urban design informed lenses of health, being physical health, mental well-being, community adhesion, and sort of environmental resilience and sustainability. And that allowed us to start to think about what decisions were being made and really look at all of these projects from an equity stance as well. So trying to balance competing needs by seeing where the benefits lie.
I think it goes back to what you were just saying, Jenna, about the importance of listening. And you were also saying, Dr. Kessler, like really saying, in the context of the BQE, we've presented several ways to think about how to create connections under this highway that is long disconnected communities, especially communities of color, low-income communities. And in our first couple of rounds of workshops, we really heard about the importance of connection. And so really mapping out what that might look like and hearing back from the community. And really, I mean, anyone who's been to one of my BQE meetings knows I talk constantly about community-driven decision-making and radical transparency. And it's really the responsibility of government to do both when we're designing spaces.
I'll take a little bit of a backdoor entrance or whatever, but like I said, spatial planning, I think, in context of some of these issues, we see chronic health conditions being focused sort of in overlapping areas. We see diabetes, heart disease, chronic disease, all these things. And so as we look at investing our limited resources, we look at how best we can serve that community with the limited resources city government has. So areas that have a low tree canopy or like a high concentration of heat vulnerable populations, like that's a great place to make an investment in your tree canopy or cooling centers. So I think just thinking spatially about interventions is, and how these problems affect different communities differently, which I know TOHM's just been doing, so yeah.
I think we're at our end of our time. Oh, no, please.
Sorry, I was just
yeah.
going to say one thing. One, I'm actually not a doctor, but I rely on many wonderful doctors. But just the flip side to those trade-offs is that there's so many co-benefits. And I think that's what people, some of these examples spoke to. And so we think we can actually accomplish a lot when we, are really working together and with community.
So everyone's going to have to wait, I think, to answer. Oh, maybe we have a few more seconds. All right. Do we? Yes? Okay, I'm going to ask just one other question because I think it's a really good one, which is often it's the ongoing maintenance cost as opposed to the capital cost that burdens local communities. Can you chime in from your respective communities how we could start to address this challenge?
Well, the Borough President does fund some of these ongoing efforts. I know the City Council and Mayor also, delegations from the council, state, federal. I mean, there's a lot of different funding opportunities for maintenance, but yes, I think capital projects get the headlines. I think just some of we talked about million trees and green infrastructure. There's opportunities to work on job training with folks, the areas where they have a high concentration of low employment or unemployment, and sort of looking at, I guess, I just lost my questions. I lost my train of thought, but I guess that's kind of what you got to know, yeah.
Really quickly, I'll chime in that I think that when people feel ownership over their spaces and are able to shape their streets and their public spaces, that they feel that they're able to sort of steward change and maintenance moving forward. And so I think that's really key.
I think our city budget defines our priorities and our values, right? Yep. So in the last city budget, there was a significant down payment on the percent for parks, which was a huge step forward for the city. Certainly there's always more that can be done from my personal perspective, but that was a really big investment. And then similarly, the mayor recently announced a big investment in open spaces. And we're gonna be increasingly funding our open spaces. Stay tuned for a big Summer Streets announcement soon. But I really think like the way that we, working with the city council and other elected officials, that's really how we define our values to think about maintenance.
I just think, yes, we know that's important, and it is tied to the health benefits. Having a well-maintained space is also important. So just underscoring what others have shared.
Great. Thank you all so much, and thank you for the great questions. I think we have a design presentation, so I will pass the stage on.
Thank you so much. Now we will welcome Eran Chen to the stage.
Hey everyone. Thank you for being here. It's great to be here. My name is Eran Chen. I'm an architect, and I'm the owner and the founder of ODA, which is an architectural design firm that is based here in New York City and operates extensively both in the city but around the country and around the world with aim to better people's life with intensity of growth of cities. And what I'd like to share with you today is some practical solutions on all of the topics that were discussed today about the expansion of the public realm and the power that those expansion could be in transformative to transform our built environment and our communities. But before I start, I'd like to tell you a personal story, if I may. When I was 10 years old, not too long ago, I lived with my mother on a social housing project in the southern city of Beersheba in Israel. That's where I grew up. It was basically built out of 3 6-story row houses, creating a courtyard. And the courtyard was really a communal, multi-generational communal place of experience. It was actually well designed by a good architect, and it was a public-private initiative. And every day, I would come back from school with all of my friends, and we would play at the courtyards for hours. And around 5 o'clock, my mom would come home. She used to work at a lab. She would make dinner, and she would go to the balcony. All of the apartments had balconies facing in. And she would call me for dinner. But she wouldn't really call my name. She used to whistle. We had a whistle, like an ancient ringtone. And the amazing part is that all of my friends and all of their mothers had a whistle, and each one was distinct and unique. And if you're in my generations, it used to be a thing. And around 5 o'clock, the courtyard would be filled with a symphony of whistles and with this kind of enchanting sound. We knew the day is over and it's time to go home. And this is my strongest childhood memory by far. This garden of whistling mom was the shape of our neighborhood. And the activity that these courtyards have facilitated created the shape of our community. And perhaps this childhood memory shaped the DNA of my architectural firm, ODA, because we've been studying the public realm in modern cities around the world and the ways by which we can transform them in today's needs. And we talked a lot about today, more housing, affordable and free market, open, inviting, equitable public realm that is catering to all, but also more community-driven, affordable program at the street level. And I'd like to talk a lot about that because we believe that transformation requires 3 overlapping principles. First, density. Density is good as long as it's a diverse amount of people doing diverse activities around different hours of the day. Number two, public space. But not every public space, not every open space is a quality open space. We talked about NYCHA and the failure of these open spaces to be activated. It needs to be highly curated, highly designed, spaces for people to interact and to feel at home and to meet each other. And then number three is street activators around those open spaces that are not just your typical retail. The idea of a linear street with a typical retail is not the only game in town anymore. We need other programs, more community facilities, more affordable programs that would cater to more diverse amount of people and would enhance the activity at the street level. Now at ODA, regardless of, I guess, scale of our projects, program geography, we always try to overlap these three principles. And I'll give you a few examples. For example, in Brooklyn, in Denizen, the project called Denizen, it's in Bushwick. We've basically revamped the typical New York City block into a series of interconnected courtyards united by a park, public park. And 20% of the building is affordable, but what's interesting is that we've created these highly curated courtyards at the ground level, uniting both amenities, but also small businesses and community facilities. And then we curated artists, local artists, to create mega murals around the projects that are seen by all. So essentially, overlapping this increased density with art, with community life, and with diverse activity at the ground floor. In the city of Rotterdam, we've converted a dormant, fortress-like, century-old post office building, it's a national monument, to a mixed-use complex that anchors by two public courts. And those basically are open to the public 24/7, and everything around those courtyards, with collaborations with city agencies, was programmed as an affordable, accessible program that is needed by the community. So essentially, the common space that is created bring a sense of surprise to an expansion of an urban realm within a private building, if you will, and enhances the urban experience. This building is under construction right now. That's out of sequence. Well, let's see. It's totally out of sequence. So let me see what happened here. Where's the movie, guys? Can you put on the video? There you go, thank you. So this is Buenos Aires. What we've done here is, again, it's owned by the city. We converted an old parking garage into a mixed-use building that unites the central Palermo Park nearby through a ramp loop. This ramp loop is open to all, and it allows people to go up to the roof of the building where they can see the view of Buenos Aires unlike any other place in the city, enjoy a drink or a meal, and then go down. This is the first time in Argentina that a public and private building has united in such a way, uniting public realm with Class A office building. Now, how can this line of thinking be applicable to larger scale project in an urban scale? So recently, I've been asked by the Washington, D.C. Economical Partnership to look at downtown D.C. and the Golden Triangle in D.C. for innovative design solutions. Well, we all recognize the hardship that D.C. Center is experiencing. Much of it is by the decimation of COVID, a mass exodus of office workers, and the aging infrastructure. I also argue that we are standing at the threshold of an unparalleled opportunity, a chance to provide evolution for D.C. Most of the buildings are office buildings, as you can see in this diagram, but only a small percentage are Class A, so the majority of the buildings are either vacant or Class B or C building. The vacancy rate is the highest it has ever been in D.C., and there's no end in sight. And by the way, there's huge financial implications to the city by the deduction of commercial taxes. The urban activators around. Of course, we all know them all. Washington University and Georgetown are great, but they're definitely not enough for such area to create activity at the ground floor. And retail, where it exists, is deep, inefficient, and declining, very much like Midtown Manhattan. Now, prior to coronavirus, thousands of DC area workers commuted daily to work. And as we know, this density has provided somewhat livelihood at the street level, but that has been dramatically declined. So as you can say, the pounding heart of DC is at risk. So what we'd like to do is bring back the beating heart of DC and create an active public realm that does not rely solely on the commuters, but is attractive to everybody around. Because if we succeed, this will add value to the buildings above and allow us to flip the script. So we don't have to change the building, we first have to change the public realm. We suggested what I call the DC greenways, and let me share with you what I suggested. If we focus on the Golden Triangle, it's located between DuPont Circle and anchored by K and avenues. The street and sidewalks are just not large enough to create a meaningful public realm. But on the other hand, the alleyways are used only for services and could be invaluable public asset. So let's zoom a little more. What we propose is two surgical interventions. The first one is we identify buildings in the district that are just too deep for modern use or too deep for conversion into residential, and we incentivize developers to cut them at the alleyway side, inside, making them convertible to residential use, while relocating the floor area to the roof. That value at the upper floor is clearly higher due to the air and light and views, and will be a major incentives for those developers to also pay and maintain that public realm. The second idea is to look at the ground floor and propose an inclusionary retail program or affordable retail program. Managed by an independent body, owners and developers can exchange the underused ground floor retail for floor area at the top. Now, this underused ground floor will then be rented at a nominal regulated cost to major activators around the city in need for space. For example, we spoke to universities about classrooms, performance centers, artist studios, sports facility, and large gathering spaces that usually they're in a need, but usually they can't afford. The result of these two principles would then eventually create a series of interconnected, active and walkable courtyards that draw in communities on a daily and growing basis. Now, let me give you an example. George Washington University and Georgetown University can use both teaching spaces as well as event spaces at the street close to their campuses. Museums like the Smithsonian, National Gallery, and Hirshhorn would use spaces for artists and community engagement programs that otherwise they can't afford. And the new civic program, alongside the extended open space, will create transparency and enhance the pedestrian activity. Now imagine the flow of people to these civic anchors will create a chain reaction that attract new type of businesses, some of them free market and some of them under the inclusionary retail program of the city. So some of them are affordable. And the heart of the Golden Triangle will become a living destination with increased motivation to convert more building into residential, because now there's activity, there's life at the street. The new local population will demand new types of family retail businesses, etc. The drama begins. The hidden courtyard and alleyways will become backbone of these new communities, making an area more attractive places to live. The affordable ground floor created by the inclusionary program will cater to the needs of the community, not just determined by the market forces. This will lead to a fun and active and walkable neighborhoods. You can imagine bars, restaurants, galleries, maker spaces, urban farms, art activities for teenagers, and they will draw more people back into the city center. The new local population will demand services like family needs, playgrounds, childcare, groceries, doctor's office, that will support the growing residential population as well. So here's the best part. More and more people would want to come back to work at the office. With such an active neighborhood, commuters will enjoy a few days of the week at the neighborhood. Now, putting a vision into the words. Let's go back to New York City. I'd like to run a video where I'm talking at the Bero Council, I'll shut up, that studies similar principles in Midtown Manhattan. We all know the hardship of Midtown Manhattan. While cities are expanding all over the world and super tall structures dominate our skyline, there's an increasing importance to reactivate our urban core and improving life at the street level. We looked at the historical Flower District, located in the crossroad of iconic city landmarks and public parks in the heart of Manhattan, where community and commerce once flourished. This neighborhood, once filled with hundreds of flowers vendors, have been struggling for the past few decades. As traffic and cars have come to overpower pedestrians, it has become very hard to maintain a sustainable social and economic urban fabric. While typical streets are not enough to sustain a new density, existing city blocks have hidden courtyards that are privately owned and are underutilized. We propose a new city regulation that will encourage developers to bestow interior courtyards and create new connections to the street in exchange for an increase of floor area and height. As a result, the privately owned area will open up to the public. Now imagine a typical block where over time, these spaces are being created and passageways are connecting them to the street. The ground floor surrounding these newly formed courtyards can now be meticulously programmed, replacing urban decay with markets, small businesses, coffee shops, diversified housing, hospitality, urban farming, and public art, and will expand the public realm to create a true cultural experience. 23rd Street. Currently, all those spaces are unused back of the house retail spaces at the ground floor. Web of environmental, social, and economical sustainability will take root over time and expand in the Flower District and beyond. We look forward to a New York that is more inviting to explore, with green nooks of secret experiences that expands the imagination and show the power of reinvention. So take out the drama from the music. This is a theoretical project that we've done for the city to try to demonstrate that these things are possible, but they require an overlap of policy, city policy, and collaborations with the public realm, incentivize people to invest more money at the public realm and create more equitable ground floor, and start replacing the typical retail with affordable inclusionary retail programs that would be more interesting. I want to finish with a project that just got approved by the City Council, quite controversial, but I share it anyways. It would end up being a 45% affordable housing on 5 city blocks in Queens, in Astoria. Now, I want to tell you why I think it's very important to talk about the expansion of these public realm also in ground-up projects like this. What we've proposed, which I think is unique and was not proposed before, is to take 25% of the private land of the developer, quarter of it, and dedicated as privately owned public space, adding to the green spaces that are in huge need in Queens. And I want to expand on the fact that we need those in different scales. And then we disperse them as a sort of a sequence of open spaces that relates to one another and are totally walkable, but then also determine the ground floor program that would enhance them. And that ground floor program should be catering the needs of those communities currently, and not just determined by the market forces. And so essentially the goal was to cut out, to provide the outdoor spaces that are in such a dire need, and then surround it with relative program at the ground floor that would create diversity of places. Some of them I catered to food, maker spaces, an expansion of the Museum of Moving Arts. Some of them would be passageways for local businesses to flourish in small scale, and some would be a bigger park that is supported by a community hub that would facilitate free program, or at least affordable programs for schools and after schools program. So this idea clearly demands density, and that's sort of the price that is being paid. But I think overall, it's a different way of thinking of a public realm and expansion of it, and potentially addressing elements of equitability, not to mention that 45% of this housing would be affordable. So I'm very glad that this was approved by the commission, and hopefully will go into action in the next few years. I just want to finish and call out to everybody here. And the reason that I'm here is I think that between architects and planners, between city agencies and all of us, and the private sector, we've got to find a way to collaborate and create a win-win situation to transform the need of our communities into reality, and I think it's possible. And I am looking forward to a city where the public realm is not just a linear street or one major park, but a sequence of pockets of urban interactions that promote more kids, more families, and more whistling moms alike. So thank you very much for listening. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Now we'll pause for a 10-minute break. So if we could, 10-minute break. If we could all be back in the auditorium in 10 minutes. Thank you.